shares now, almost on that one, and of course 10 lakh shares on Ubank, Colorants, the India subsidiary. Vaibhav Sanghavi is with us, CEO at Ask Hedge Solutions. Vaibhav, good to have you with us here. I know you don't we don't talk stocks, but Sudarshan Chemicals, it's not a stock we talk about every day, but they're a leader in the pigments business. Have you looked at this at all ever, or any thoughts, if you have any?
No, unfortunately, Prashant, I think we don't track it closely on this name. So I will pass on in terms of the comments.
Okay, let's talk about metals then as a sector. So markets are fixating on this meeting tomorrow in China. Do you think anything will come out of it? And there's money to be made here next week.
Yeah, of course, I think what we've seen, Prashant, from a sentiment perspective is on the earlier kind of stimulus leg, we've seen some sizable rally from a metal pack. Partly kind of factoring in that the momentum on this sector will kind of continue. And of course, the street is looking forward to the event over the weekend. While in my experience, we've always seen that when there is when people are looking on a particular event in a very eagerly manner, then large part of that discounting, is generally done ahead of that event. So in this case, while we will wait for what actually comes out of that meeting, but my sense is basically the structural, parameters in terms of the Chinese economy at this point in time aren't changing, much. We will have to wait whether the real estate sector kind of recovers. And one thing which is unlikely to kind of recover at all is basically the demographic profile, of China, which in my view is slowly and steadily going towards the Japan way, over a longer period of time, which I do feel that on a structural basis can kind of see growth, which can be pretty subdued.
Okay, all right, got that. Vaibhav, hi, good afternoon, good to have you on. So that's metals. Let's talk about IT as well. That's the other side of the market that's gotten a fair amount of attention and money, right, in the last couple of weeks and months, as there's been a bit of a churn across portfolios. The season has just started, and maybe TCS was a bit of an outlier. But what's your stance? Have you been allocating more money here? What do you like? What are you staying away from?
See, Subi, I think in all our previous interactions also, right, in the last 2 quarters, we've always maintained that, IT is a sector which was kind of getting bottomed out, where incrementally we had seen commentary kind of changing. At the same time, we are seeing some amount of green shoots, from BFSI, while the generative AI, not posing an incremental threat. In fact, it was going to give you opportunities from a revenue accretion as well. Now, having said that, what we've seen in the last 2 quarters is basically the price is actually rallying by about 15 to 20% easily. At the end of it, it's kind of outperformed the Nifty as well, which is we are at a point where the expenses, the valuations are, slightly rich. But also on the consideration that, for the first 2 quarters of a financial year, you always see generally that the results are pretty good. And the subsequent 2 quarters are generally weak because then would be the season of furloughs as well. So we are at a point where we've already rallied. The commentary on the underlying business is unlikely to change in a big way. It is where we are turning, where we were very, very bullish on that sector to kind of neutralish, at this point in time. So we will have a stock-specific opportunity out there, but from an overall sectoral basis, we are not, very, very excited.
Hi, Vaibhav. Good afternoon, and good to see you win. What about the telecom space? Everyone thought in the middle that Vodafone Idea is going to be the big unlocker. Well, the stock is half from the recent peak. Bharti Airtel, though, that's still holding steady. While the other play we have is Reliance Industries has been under some pressure. Among the three, how do you play the telecom theme?
See, and Nigel, I think from a telecom perspective, the government vision is very clear that they don't want to play a market in that sense, right? So we'll continue to see, 3-player market or more from a telecom perspective, while that competition is kind of healthy. What we also need to understand from a larger opportunity perspective is that from business standpoint, I think there is a tremendous amount of opportunity going forward. Of course, these valuation bits and pieces will start to look expensive in between, but I think from a longer term perspective, at any decline, I think this is a sector where to look at. And I would rather prefer to go in for a pure play telecom rather than a conglomerate in that sense. So that is how our preference, would be, while the sector view on overall long-term perspective remains bullish.
What about banks? What have you made so far of the kind of banking updates that we've got? There is also a lot of management churn taking place. How would you position yourself in the financial space and even in the non-lenders like wealth management, asset management? Give us the entire landscape on financials.
I mean, financial services, while very, very broad, I think we are, we are looking in, very, very optimistically on the financial services, which you mentioned about wealth managers, asset managers, and likes of those. We do think that they are in a structural bull run for a longer period of time as we see our demographic profile kind of play out in terms of their business tailwinds. Having said that, from a banking sector perspective, which actually garners the larger weightage in terms of the Nifty, we do think that from a profitability perspective, we may see kind of downgrade in terms of our estimates, both from a public and a private sector perspective. Having said that, our preference towards private sector would be there, purely because if you see from a last 3-year perspective, on an average, good private banks, which were trading close to about 3 times price to book multiples, are now sub 2. Whereas PSU banks have rallied from about 0.5, 0.6 times to probably 1 to 1.1 time kind of price to book. So the valuation between them is compressed. And incrementally, when we see there is some amount of asset quality pressure coming out from personal loan segment, MFI segment, my sense is basically that, private banks is a segment we would want to look at. Having said that, we still do feel that on a banking perspective, as a sector's perspective, we would be neutralish. So there is play within the sector in a bank side, but financial services is something which we are bullish from a structural standpoint.
Thanks, Vaibhav, for joining in and giving us your take on the markets as well as individual stocks. Wishing you a good evening, and we look forward to chatting up with you in a couple of weeks or so. By the way, Prashant, just one point.